Welcome to the Way She Leads podcast, where we integrate strategy, intuition, and real life leadership so that you can create impact with more joy and ease without pushing, proving, or burning yourself out. Hi, I'm Megan Akatu, former corporate leader turned transformational coach, and I help women feel fully alive in their purpose in a way that ripples out through every area of their lives. If you've ever felt like there is a better way, you are not wrong and you are not alone. Each episode brings you conversations with experts and real leaders sharing tangible and holistic practices to help you lead your life in a way that actually feels good, not just looks good on paper. Welcome in. Today on the podcast, I'm here with Laura Saldivar Luna. She is the founder and CEO and a transformational coach of Piñata Possible. Laura is also my business bestie, and I spend a great deal of time with her. I'm so excited to have Laura here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Megan. I'm so happy to be here.
I met Laura while we were in our coaching school. And we were not super close then, and we became closer afterwards. And what I really appreciate about Laura is just one of the deepest listeners I have ever met. And it feels like she's staring into your soul when you are in her presence. And then over the years, we have just learned how much we have in common. We were looking at a lot of the same colleges. We both studied abroad in Spain. We're both human design projectors. Our kids are about the same age. And so over the years, we have become closer and closer. And they say that you are the sum of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And mine is my husband, my 2 children, my sister, and Laura Saldivar Luna. I'm so happy that you are here today. You tell us about how you became the Laura of today.
Oh my gosh. Well, I became the Laura of today by being the Laura of yesterday. And many yesterdays all compiled together have added up to make me the Laura of today. And while that sounds fairly simple, yesterdays all combined included lots of ups and downs, lots of difficult lessons learned, lots of moments of joy. And so it's that entire journey, the ups and the downs that I've learned in the collection of them have made it possible for me to know the things, share the things, be the person that can show up in support of others who are navigating the ups and downs of their own lives. And to give a little more detail to the ups and downs, I grew up in San Antonio, Texas. I live in the same exact neighborhood where I grew up, just a couple streets over from my parents, a couple streets over from my grandmother. And so it's a very full circle journey that brings me right back to the place that I started. But the journey was winding. I was the first in my family to go to and graduate from college. I went to college in Washington, D.C., so very far from where I started. And that was a really big family goal for us to have the adventure of one of us going to college, and then my sister went to the same college. And so it was the journey that our family got to take together of watching a breakthrough for the next generation in terms of educational outcomes. And then from that journey, I then built a long career in education. I started off as a classroom teacher. I worked for many years for the education nonprofit Teach for America, where I went from the entry level of the organization to the C-suite by the time I completed my long career there. So education has always been a really, really big part of my journey, whether I was leading the classroom, receiving the learning, holding the space in a group for us to learn collectively. It's been a really, really big running theme in my own life, and it's something I really value. Husband and I value for our kids as well, is how can we have what we know be a gift to ourselves, but also a gift to the world.
Love that. How we became closer was after we were done with our coaching program, there was another program, and you had to be a certified coach, and you had to create your accountability group before you signed up. And so I had reached out to a few other coaches in our program and said, hey, do you want to do this together? And then we were then on a weekly Zoom as part of our accountability group. And when you are an entrepreneur, no one tells you this, all of a sudden you get bombarded with messages like you have to do it this way. You either have to work with organizations or individuals. You can't do both. And you need to have one clear message. And Laura and I were fairly new entrepreneurs navigating both the organizations and one-on-one coaching. And we were both doing it pretty well, even though the world was telling us we couldn't do it that way. And that was what we bonded over. And so then we started chatting more often and even talking about how do I approach this client? Like, what do I put in this proposal? What do you remember from that time as we were becoming closer?
What I remember from that time best is that we were in this weekly check-in and this daily practice. And so we got into a rhythm of holding each other accountable for, have you done your practice today? Have you done your practice this week? How did your practice go? And it was really beautiful because the technique we were learning we were really just starting to apply that technique to building our respective businesses. And since we were on a similar timeline, early stage of growing our coaching practices, the day-to-day practice of whatever techniques we were learning was actually the practice of business building. And so as we were following each other's journeys, it started to become an opportunity where we could compare all these notes. And I started to feel less alone. I started to feel less wacky in the challenges I was navigating. It's like, oh, thank goodness I'm not the only one who's asking this question. And I remember so vividly, one of the things I love most about you, Megan, is that we can ride the emotional roller coaster together. It's like some days we're like, top of the world, this is all working out great for us. And some days we're like, I'm not sure about this. Maybe I need to go in a different direction. And it's just all so welcome as part of the roller coaster of building something that's never been built before and building it in our own way, despite the world trying to tell us, well, here's the way you should build it, or here's the way you must build it, or here's the best practice that's worked for everyone else. We're finding our own way. And so to be able to take all the techniques and still be emergent, I found you to be just such an amazing partner in doing that day to day to day. And that's continued on for us now all these years later.
Yes, I am so grateful. And what I felt in that moment was, right, the world was saying, like, trying to shove us in the box. And you and I were like, nope. And I think that will be very obvious as we continue to speak about like our resistance to being shoved into a box and like how that has served both of us in different ways. And so, Laura, when I think about you, I feel like you have a very strong sense of self-worth. And I see it come up over and over again when you are walking into very complex organizations and you're like, I see it. I see how I'm going to string, all the various things that this group needs. I feel good about how I'm going to do it. This is the pricing that I'm going to set. And it feels like it doesn't seem to throw you off from my perspective. You stay true to yourself through that whole process. And I would love to hear from you. Do you consider it self-worth? What would you even call it? Is it self-confidence? Is it self-love? And was that something you always had? Or how have you built that over time?
Oh my gosh, I love hearing you mirror that back to me, because you experiencing me as someone who has a lot of self-trust or self-love or self-worth, that is a reflection of a desired state of being that I've held for a very long time. And so you offering that back to me helps me see that is here now. That is here now. That's part of who I am. And so thank you for offering that. And I would say my journey is actually one of not feeling a lot of self-confidence, not feeling a lot of self-worth, not feeling a lot of self-trust, but it's through the learning of how to step into more trust and understanding and support of myself that I think I've had real breakthroughs in being able to see the gifts that I have and see the gifts in others. Because it was always easier for me to see the gifts in others, to see the assets and the strengths in others. That is an immediate thing. It was always harder for me to see that in myself. And so my work over the last few years has been to really reintegrate my own life and to see myself with the same kind of wholeness and powerful potential that I see in everybody else. And so I think part of what allows me to walk into a room, though, and know there is infinite power and possibility in that room, in those people, in the group, regardless of what they're dealing with, no matter how fragmented they feel, no matter how misaligned things feel, no matter how divided they feel, I can see that potential in them because I have just seen time and time again what happens when you hold up a mirror to people. In much the same way you just did for me, Megan, like when you hold up a mirror to people and you allow them to really sit with themselves and see themselves, all of the tough armor begins to crumble and fade away. And then people are left with seeing an interior of themselves and then seeing how that interior version can be more fully integrated. And then I just see time and time again that when you have that internal alignment and integration, then everything you want outside of yourself, whether it's better relationships with your team or more productive outcomes or a different way of life, whatever it is all possible once you are internally aligned and integrated. And so I think I see people as already aligned and integrated and whole. And so that just allows me to see for them the possibilities that oftentimes they have yet to see themselves. And so being able to see that for myself has been a bit of a journey, but now I feel like I have arrived. And part of it is just like we talked about before, a bit of a daily practice. Can I be in a daily practice of restoring and returning to trust of myself when it slips away? Because it will slip away. And part of my work is to reground and recenter in the trust that's always here now.
So powerful, and so powerful to be that mirror for other people. But then I'm also hearing you say for yourself as well. And so what is part of either like your daily or weekly practices in order to cultivate that self-love and self-worth within yourself?
Some of these practices for a very, very long time and didn't know that they were practices. One of the practices is to go and witness nature. I would do this oftentimes when I was in my executive roles and I was feeling misaligned or feeling confused or feeling out of sorts. And it was typically, I didn't have this language at the time, but it was typically first a sensation occurring in my body where I just felt like something was off. And I would tell my team members, I'd say, I need to go ground. I would actually call it, I'm going to go to the ground right now. And that would mean one of two things for me. It would mean, one, I'm going to go into nature and actually look at a tree or put my feet in the dirt or something that brought me back into the majesty, the magic, the oneness of nature so that I could feel part of something that I know has its own cycles, ebbs and flows, and will work always over time if you allow the cycles to flow. So that was the first way I would ground. The other way I would ground would be to go into a school. Because I worked in an organization that was focused on educational excellence and equity for students, oftentimes students that historically had been underserved in schools and communities that had historically been underserved. If I was doing work that felt too far removed from the ground, it would often lead me to that feeling of feeling out of sorts, misaligned, or disconnected. And so when I would go to the ground, I would go into a school, I would go see and observe our teachers in action with students, I would witness the learning that was unfolding, I would speak with principals, I would connect with people who were doing the work on the ground day to day, so that I myself could be refreshed on the true experience, the true needs, the importance and the worth of that. And then that would allow me to step back into my leadership role to make whatever decisions, make whatever financial asks, make whatever vision clarifications I needed to make in order to keep the direction of the organization sound and strong and steady, because then I had the grounding that I needed. So I think those grounding practices can be very micro practices, and they can be part of a regular routine. And they certainly were for me as an intentional practice, and then sometimes they could be a reactionary practice as well. If I just felt out of sorts, I'm like, nope, now is the time to ground before I do anything else. That is what I do as a first order priority.
I love that. And I'm sure, the teachers appreciated, right, having senior leadership there. And I love that even as regular practice of all senior leaders. Let's get back to the ground, to what we're here to do and what our mission is. So there's just so much that goes both ways for you and for them. And did you always know that nature was grounding for you? Was that something you did as a kid, or is that just as you moved up, there was bigger decisions to make? You just found that as a practice that supported you?
I think as a kid, I found nature to be a place to play many sports as a kid growing up, but I did play a lot of music. And so I was in the marching band, and so I would have the experience of playing music outside and watching how the music would resonate for a big audience and how you would string together different sounds so that they could have a larger collective resonance and a larger reach to be able to reach out to those who are there to witness the music and experience the music. And so I think I had these experiences outside that allowed me to feel there is something bigger here when it comes to who I am, what I'm creating, what people are creating together. And so then I started to observe nature a bit more. And this really kicked in as I got older. I remember I did, as you mentioned, we both studied abroad in Spain. When I studied abroad in Spain, that was a very disruptive experience for me, positively disruptive experience, because I got to see a totally new worldview immersed in a culture that really prioritized slowing down, deep conversation, and taking in the external environment, and then being in deep relationship within that environment. So in the same way I got to, as a kid, see like, oh wow, things go bigger, I got to see in Spain things get more intimate, things get more connected, things slow down. And so here we are in these outdoor cafes, or here we are in this rustic countryside, and I could just see, wow, like this magic extends so far outward, and it extends so far inward, and it connects in relationships. So I think nature has just been a wise teacher in that way. And now I've made it more of a part of my regular life. Like I'm on the Parks and Recreation Commission for my local community. So just ways that I can plug in to have nature be an intentional practice. Again, sometimes I find these things through emergence, but now I can make them a more dedicated practice so they become part of just the way I live infused into the day-to-day.
So much wisdom there. I didn't really appreciate local parks until COVID. I needed ways to entertain my children. My husband was getting a master's degree that had completely moved online. So over the weekends, I needed a way to get them out of the house. And we went to these local parks week after week after week. And because it was spring, you could see like, oh, today the roots are this big and next week they were this big. And when you go week after week, you can really appreciate the beauty that was unfolding.
I had this moment I'll never forget. I had a really, really difficult week at work when I was an executive at Teach for America. It was probably the most difficult week I navigated. And I remember sitting in a conversation with someone as I was beginning to chart the course for the week. And it was a busy week. I had a lot of difficult things I needed to do, and it was a lot of back-to-back meetings, as was the typical way for my schedule at that time. And I remember telling someone, I just need to go see trees and flowers. And that person was like, okay, then go see some trees and flowers. And so I remember working with my assistant to clear the day, reschedule all the meetings I had, and I went and I sat in a garden for the day. That is what I did. And while that feels like it's the furthest thing from what is supposed to be, quote unquote, on an executive's calendar, it was the thing I knew I needed in that moment if I was going to successfully move through the rest of the week and the decisions and the presence and the rigor that was going to be required for me as a leader to be successful. And so I'll never forget that, because it felt very childlike in some ways. It felt very honest in other ways. It felt very real and raw. And it was one of the most nourishing days I had as a leader in that executive role.
Well, and that is so self-honoring. So go back to, we started this conversation because I was like, you are someone that, to me, that has high self-trust and high self-worth. You heard to do that. You actually trusted yourself to make that decision and say, hey, I need to be in trees and flowers. And then you did it. And then, so what was the positive effect of spending the day doing that?
Well, because my role at that time, I was a chief people officer. So I worked as the head of HR. I was doing the difficult work of helping my team shepherd systems that supported a 1,700 person workforce. We were also doing the deep work of holding space for people that were going through the ups and downs of COVID. It was post George Floyd's murder, so there was a lot of racial reckoning and tension that people were grappling with. And so there were true experiences that were coming up from the surface for people that our team, as an HR and people team, we needed to hold. We needed to hold spaces for people to be held, so that they could be free of what they needed to be free with to show up and do their best work in service of our mission. And sometimes that was deep systems work and very technical. Sometimes that was deep relational work and very much about presence. And so for me to be able to support my team as they supported our staff, as our staff supported thousands of teachers who were working in schools during this very tender and tense time, I found that part of the way we could ripple something positive through that system was through grounding and regulating our own nervous systems, our own way of being, so that we could be and create safe and supportive containers for people to unfold whatever needed to be unfolded. And from there, then they could move into the next set of actions to forward their goals. But sometimes, we had to listen to a lot of difficult feedback. We had to help people through a lot of tense conflict. We had to grapple with decisions and say, this decision benefits this subset, this decision might be more difficult for this subset. How do we sit with those inherent tensions in decision making and then allow ourselves to be in relationship, dialogue, and communication with people so they understand whatever decision gets made? That was all very difficult work. It could be emotionally draining, especially if you're taking on the emotion from others who are not happy or feeling dissatisfied with a decision. And so to ready ourselves for that, it really was, how do we ground and remain centered ourselves so that we can be steady when the rest of the world is feeling a bit shaky?
Yes. And then I just heard you say, take care of self first before we can come back and take care of others. So powerful. Well, you were just talking about your goals. And another thing that really strikes me about you is you have a high commitment to excellence always. And I would consider both of us high achievers. And sometimes when you're telling me what you're doing, I'm like, dang, This woman is on it. She's so committed. I know that you are journaling and setting goals every Monday. And I know that you have a top of the month practice, you have a top of the quarter practice. I know that this is something that you have been doing for many, many years and long before you even became a coach. Can you tell us either how this practice came about, how it supported you in achieving your goals and maintaining that commitment to excellence?
Yeah. You were asking me a bit earlier about, self-trust and self-honoring and self-love and self-confidence. And while when I was younger, I don't know that I always felt those things. What I did have as a very young person that I think I still have and still use as my go-to strategy is a really hefty dose of dreaming. I think I've always been a really big dreamer. I've always wanted really big things. And one thing that's been kind of funny along my journey is that I've often been unafraid, or maybe it was naive, who knows, but I would just tell people the things that I was dreaming about. I would walk around and I'd say, one day, I want to be X thing, or I'm going to achieve Y thing. And I would just tell people. And the more that I would tell people, the more I would believe it was going to happen. The more other people would believe it was going to happen, the more other people would collaborate and support me in making the dream a reality. So everything from, I'm going to be the first in my family to go to and graduate from college, or I want to be, the executive director of Teach for America in 5 years. I mean, I had some really big goals on really ambitious timelines, but they all got accomplished. And I think it's because I was in this wild practice of just talking about it. And so I remember when I started my business, I had the same go-to thinking of like, okay, I'm starting this business. It's a coaching practice. It's called Piñata Possible. I don't know all the things that it will one day be, but I do know that I have a big dream that it's going to be life-changing for the people it serves. So I remember I would go tell people, I had a goal, one person a day. Can I tell them I'm building Piñata Possible? This is what I'm building it to do. And sure enough, that's how I started to get some of my first clients. So your question, though, is about how to turn that into structure, because dreams can be very, very wonderful and inspiring and motivating. For me, they really come alive, though, when I start taking the aligned action to bring the dream into reality. So over time, and through a lot of experimentation, have refined a variety of different practices that allow me to translate a big dream and goal into a flexible structure that allows me to take action at the annual level, at the quarterly level, at the monthly level, at the weekly level, and at the daily level, so that everything is in integration, in lining back up to what it is that I really, really want. And that started during my executive leadership days because I had to have clear priorities in order to choose where I wanted to allocate my time. So over time, I got to refine a lot of these structures for matching my calendar to my priorities, matching my organizational budget to my priorities, matching my decisions to my priorities. But what was the common thread is I needed to have priorities in order to make any of that alignment work. So the same is true now as I lead my business is what are the priorities, what matters most, and then how do I give myself enough structure to be able to support those priorities, and how do I ensure those priorities are not like what people say I should be doing, quote unquote, but are actually what I want to be doing and line back up to the dream.
And where does all of that clarity come from? A lot of people, they're so busy. They know that they want to show up every day at work and do a great job. They know that they want to get promoted. And yet that can still feel hard, though, to write out specific goals. Where does all your clarity come from?
I think my clarity comes from lack of clarity. I know it sounds a little bit funny, but when I am in lack of clarity, which is a very normal and human experience, I use that as the cue to my brain and body. Now it's time to go get the clarity. And so oftentimes I think many of us leaders, we just stay in the default state of, well, I'm confused or I'm unclear or I'm uncertain and it's unknown and that feels scary. So we just kind of dwell there and stay there and accept that as it must be that way. When really we can slow down and say, okay, if I take 5 minutes to just ask myself the question, what matters most right now? From the lack of clarity, I can build that regrounding and then the redirection as needed to be able to refocus my efforts. So I've been using this example recently with the clients that I work with, but it's this idea of recentering. So, I talked a little bit earlier about grounding. Grounding for me is the same practice of recentering myself, bringing myself back to the center of what really matters, what are my values, what matters most in this instance. And it's very similar to being in a Google map. And so if you go to Google Maps and you type in your destination A, it'll chart your course for you. And then there's a button in the bottom left-hand corner that says recenter. And you press that button at any time during your journey to bring the map right to where you are. And it'll zero in on this is now your precise location. Maybe you took a wrong turn earlier, or maybe there was a detour you didn't expect, or maybe, you ended up stopping for coffee and so, didn't account for that, taking you off
A matcha latte.
A matcha latte. So whatever the off-track experience is, you can always recenter yourself and just bring yourself back into the now. Where am I now? I can still get to where I'm going. It just may be a different path, a different route. And I think the same is true in leadership. The more we can recenter ourselves, we can then get to our desired destination much more efficiently, much more effectively, and much more safely, in a way that also brings people along with us. And I think leaders sometimes think if I take the time to recenter, reground, it's going to slow me down. I find it to be the opposite for myself, for the leaders that I coach. If you take the time to recenter, you speed yourself up because now you know exactly where you are, you know exactly where you're going, and you can remap the route accordingly instead of just going this way, that way because you're confused and you're not quite sure where you are or where you're headed.
That is such a clear analogy. So thank you for sharing that with us. And when you were saying, what is the greatest priority right now? Where am I within getting to this priority? That takes a huge amount of self-awareness. I'm committed to working through this uncertainty. And in order to do that, I need to go back and meet myself, sit in that uncomfortable feeling, and then move forward.
That is something that I think over time I have learned. That's not necessarily a natural gift that I began with. Over time, I have learned how to set priorities and how to ensure those priorities align to what it is that I really want. And there are a couple of tricks that I've learned for this that have helped me because this was not, again, an easy practice. It wasn't a natural practice. So I had to be in a concerted effort to learn how to do this. I have found that there are a couple of things that are going on for people for why they don't want to set priorities. And I think underneath most of those reasons why people don't want to set priorities is some kind of fear. It's some sort of fear of setting the wrong priorities, some sort of fear of if I prioritize this and I don't prioritize these other things, then it's all going to fall apart. Or if I prioritize this, then this group of people will feel left out and what am I going to do there? So it becomes almost a bit of a safety mechanism for people to not have priorities, because if you can avoid having to choose and decide and create a direction, you can stay over here in your safe comfort zone and but then nothing really gets done to the degree in which you want it. Priority setting sometimes feels unsafe and feels scary and feels risky and feels hard for leaders, and it definitely felt that way for me. So a couple things that I've learned. One is to ask myself the question, what do I not want? Or what do I not want to focus on? Because sometimes I can rattle off the answers to that much more clearly. And so by process of elimination, I can refine,
get them out.
What it is that I do want.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
But that itself is a bit of a clearing practice for the fear and the worry and the anxiousness that can come in through why do I not want to let this go? What's scary about saying that that's not a priority? So asking myself what I don't want has allowed me to get clearer and a bit more comfortable tiptoeing my way into what it is that I do want. So that's the first trick. The second trick is to remind myself that to say what it is that I want out loud, to say that something is a priority, is actually historically has not been safe for certain people in our society. If you come from a historically excluded or marginalized group and you exist in a history of oppression and oppressive systems, to declare out what you want may not have always been an option for you and for your ancestors. And so there is a very natural, embedded, again, human experience to say, then let me guard myself.
Right.
Let me guard my safety and security. Let me keep close what it is that's true for me, because expressing it might cause a risk to me, to my family, to my community. So over time, many of our wise ancestors and what we've inherited from them have caused us to say, let me hold what I have within, just to normalize that and say, hey, that may be why I feel this default human tendency to keep my priorities close, to keep quiet, to not decide, not declare. That is actually, again, my body protecting me. That resistance is very wise. It's a wise teacher. It's not that I'm not capable. It's just that maybe I've been conditioned to not fully express what it is that I really, really want or what's a priority. So to know, okay, this may not be the easiest thing, can allow me to take a breath and settle into the fact, like, okay, body, brain trying to protect me, so human, so normal. And there's not an immediate threat right now. So let's go ahead and sit with the question long enough. What do I really, really want? Even if that question feels different and unsafe for the first few minutes that we're being with it. So what you want and what's a priority are different questions than what everyone else thinks you should do, what society says you should do, what feels feasible. What you want is a very different question. And I've learned that it takes some patience, some care, and some time to sit with it, to allow it to really land in the body and give it some space, because it can be a tender question that requires a little bit of opening and unfolding for the leader.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for saying that, because I was going to ask you about resistance. Let's say you start your week and you are charting out your weekly goals. I would say most people tend to be the most successful when they have a structure that they can rely on, but then also having enough space where we can be in that flow and we can allow our intuition to guide us. So for you, like, how does that balance feel like?
Yeah, that reminds me of what you were saying at the beginning of this podcast, Megan, about, sometimes the world tells us we have to choose. And we're like, no, actually, I like both. And I think over time, I've just realized that I am a student of, a practitioner of, a fan of the both and. How can I have a both and mindset about my life? How can I have great external results and great internal alignment? How can I have great structure and great flexibility and fluidity? How can I have a great career, fulfilling career, and a really thriving marriage and mothering relationship with my children? So a both and approach helps me when I get into that default survival tendency, like, oh, I must choose. Do I want structure? Do I want flexibility? I get to have both, and I can build something that allows both to be here. So one of the things I do, and I've done this for a very, very long time, going back to my executive career, is every Monday morning is my sacred time where I am grounding and setting intentions for the week. And I hold that as a weekly ritual. Even when my schedule was complex and people wanted to meet with me and needed me, I would hold sacred time on Monday, because I told myself people dread Mondays. And I want Monday to be the best day. I want Monday to be the day I so look forward to, because it's so much fun. So, for me to have something as a recurring ritual, I want to make it fun. So brew myself a pot of tea, light a little candle, make sure that I have some good music so that the routine and ritual itself feels fun, nourishing, and full of joy. That way I am wanting to do it, and it helps me to settle into some of that natural resistance that might come in. So that has been an ongoing practice for me for years. And sometimes it doesn't work out as I planned it, right? The kids are off from school, and so Monday is a totally wild day where we're off the routine, and I'm making breakfast, and something else needs to get done. And that's okay. I have told myself I get to create this ritual and routine to fit my life. So sometimes the Monday ritual moves to Tuesday. Sometimes the Monday ritual moves to Friday. And I tell myself, you know what? That's okay. This was a wacky week. The important thing is that it got in somewhere, and I can learn from the fact that perhaps this is not the way I always want to be. So it becomes a recommitment to the ritual. And I do remember one time we were in a very busy season during my executive time at Teach for America, and our CEO needed our senior leadership team to meet on Monday mornings, first thing in the morning. It was a time sensitive, we need all hands on deck, everyone needs to be in this meeting. And I remember thinking, oh, that's right in the beginning window of my sacred Monday ritual. And I get to do both. I can show up in support of my team and colleagues, complete that meeting, and still go into my ritual after that, as opposed to, well, I've lost the ritual, it's all gone now, let's just give up on it, and now I've abandoned the commitment. So I think holding the structure with enough flexibility and care to know it doesn't matter if it's perfect. It matters that it's a practice and that I recommit to the practice in an ongoing way. And so far that has allowed me to stick with it for years and to have it be part of a place where I now stack other things that I want to incorporate into a routine because it's such a solid and anchored part of the way that I live.
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing that with us, because the structure is important. And I know sometimes I buck against the structure. So what I'm hearing you say is just even like a lot of compassion and grace, that sometimes it's going to look different and then we can always recommit. Would you say that this practice has been the most supportive practice in helping you get to where you have been and where you're going right now?
I think that the most important practice that has led to the greatest transformation, and this is actually a practice I've learned from my husband, is to look in the mirror and be with the truth of what is. There were some really difficult times I navigated over the last several years that really they're part of the ups and downs that have brought me to be the Lara of today like we started, but they were not fun times to live through. There were big transition in career moments. There were big breakdowns in marriage that needed restoration. There were big realizations about ways I had deprioritized presence with my children or my own health over time. And so the awareness of what is part of what helped me say, I now want something different than this.
Yes.
And I think for a long time, I was overriding that awareness. I was bypassing it. I was trying to pretend it wasn't there. I was trying to be in total possibility and say, I can just work hard and get myself through this. And it was really my husband that encouraged me to say, can we just slow down and be with the truth of now, even if it's scary, even if it's not favorable, even if it's not what we want, so that we can then be in an acceptance of the truth of what is. And from there, we can create whatever it is we want. And that, for a while, felt scary and risky to me to be with that level of truth. Yet, it has been the most powerful practice that has opened up a more authentic pathway of possibility, because I can really say, okay, this is where I am right now. Doesn't have to be a problem. Doesn't have to be a judgment or a commentary on my self-worth. It can just be what is. And the quicker I can accept that, the more quickly I can then be on my way to recentering and recommitting to what I really, really want, even with this being currently true. So I think that finds its way into a lot of my practices now, but is probably the most powerful thing I have learned.
Isn't it true then when we can sit with what is, that it's often not as scary as we made it out to be in our heads?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that is honestly what I had been doing as a default conditioned behavior, was bypassing and overriding the truth, making the truth way scarier in my head, inventing all sorts of stories, spinning out, spiraling out into those stories, avoiding things. And all of that, again, could have been rectified by just slowing down, being with what is, accepting what is, and then saying, okay, now that if this is true, and now what? And so this is why I tell leaders, who are wanting to move big, ambitious outcomes forward, that slowing down, recentering, being with what is, and then getting clear on what you want and the priorities and creating the structure that align to it, that is what speeds up your progress. That is what gets you not only the results you want, but better results.
Yes.
And so people think it's going to be slow, it's going to slow them down, they don't have the time for it. But really, if you can clear away all that mental clutter that's dragging you down because you're spinning out into stories that are just not true, you save a bunch of time. And you're a lot less exhausted, and you have a lot more joy in the journey.
And slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
Smooth is fast.
And then it's easier to accelerate. And everything that you just said there actually really connects back to the self-awareness that we were talking about, even in the prioritization. What do I really want? And you talked about what is my part in this, and therefore then what needs to happen. One practice is what is going on, right? Marriage, life, my presence, but one maybe more work tangible about what is a priority for today. Yeah. But actually the base practice is very similar.
Yeah, exactly. You can apply it to all different levels of your leadership practice. It's like, what really matters for this year? What really matters for this quarter? What really matters for today? And I find that that's a great way to get into the practice, is to start really small. What matters for this hour? If I could spend this hour in any way I wanted, okay, how would I spend it? Yeah. And maybe I don't action that. Maybe I just give myself permission to ask the question. If I could have it any way I wanted, I'd go see trees and flowers. Okay, well, what's the truth of what is? Well, the truth of what is that I actually have, my kids with me right now, and we have to go to volleyball practice. Okay, it's great. So we're just noting, right, that what I want is to be with trees and flowers, but what I'm actually committed to doing right now is taking my kid to volleyball practice. So it doesn't mean that I deny myself what I want. It's just that I know, okay, that's there. So what does that give me? It gives me power and choice to say, after volleyball practice, let's stop at the park on the way home. We're going to see some trees and flowers. It doesn't have to be one is at the expense of the other. It's just taking the time to ask the question, illuminating all that's under the surface, because when we do that, then we can be more expressed in our leadership and in what we really want and who we really are and our authenticity, as opposed to the alternative, which for me over time was, let me just push that down. I'm going to not tell anyone about that. I'll be bitter about it. And then guess what? I'm not very kind to the people around me because I'm feeling bitterness. So it's much better if I give myself the space to honestly answer the question, express that, and say, okay, the truth of what is right now is we can't have that, but what can we do that will acknowledge that that is part of the picture, as opposed to just being something hidden.
Yeah, it's a both and life. You get to go to the park
both and life.
And still commit to those commitments about volleyball practice or whatever else is on the calendar. It is real life.
Sometimes people will come to me and they'll tell me that they're not feeling clear or clarity is escaping them. And I often remind them, you do know. The clarity is already there. We just need to get some stuff out of the way so that you can hear it again or see it again or witness it again. Give it enough space to come forward. And so I find that for me, it's so comforting to know, oh, the clarity's there. It's not like I need to go get it from somewhere outside of me. It's just I need to get enough space within myself to come back into the listening and the wisdom that's already there. That is generations in the making. That is a set of lived experiences of ups and downs in the making. And that is right there for you in the wisdom of your brain, your body, your nervous system, your heart, and all those that have come before you.
So beautifully said. What advice would you give to other insanely curious high achievers?
I would give the advice of allowing that curiosity to come forward as if it is a friend you've invited to tea, and allow curiosity to speak freely about what it really, really wants without any pressure for you to have to take action on it. I think oftentimes really high achieving women have become high achieving through, here's the thing that's needed, let me get it done. Here's the thing that's needed, let me get it done. And that beautiful cycle of success, which, by the way, that cycle of success repeated too much in excess can be what creates burnout. So we can acknowledge that there's some success from that, and it can also be its own source of limitation. So if we give ourselves a little permission to say, you know what, before I take any action, before I hold that as a to-do item, before I put it on the list of things that need my attention, let me just sit with what comes forward. Let me listen to what this friend curiosity has to say here over this cup of tea. And really let it speak its truth. Because if we don't have to action any of it, then it can say the wild things to you. It can say, well, what we really want to be doing is starting a ranch where we have Welsh corgis and a tea bar. And we're serving hot tea to the people who come and play with the corgis.
Yes.
It might be a wild idea that is rooted in things you really love, things you'd experiment with, things you'd do if you had the money, whatever. Just let it say all the things and then get curious about what curiosity has brought forward, and just allow yourself to sit with like the what if. What if I did all of those things? What if I did one of those things? What if that could be the life that's awaiting? Again, without any requirement to have to take action on any of it. Because I think sometimes we stop ourselves when we get into the logistics of, well, how am I going to make a ranch full of corgis? I don't know any corgis. We start getting into the limitations of it. So allow curiosity to come and visit. And then a second little exercise I'd give people is to say, based on what curiosity has brought forward, if you could build your perfect day filled with all those things that curiosity wants to do, what would that day look like? Where would you be? What would you be experiencing? What would you see around you? Make it come alive through all your senses. And then just get a little picture of possibility. I call these pictures of possibility of what that life could look like. Again, you don't have to take action on it, but just get it in an image and see, does that appeal to you? Do you want to try something like that out? And if so, then you can invite yourself to say, well, what's one thing I could try if I wanted to. And you can break that down into a small micro action that you might be able to take that's in alignment with where curiosity wants to go, without it feeling very threatening, without it feeling very overwhelming and risky, without it feeling like a major overhaul to your life. It's just one little thing you want to try and treat it as an experiment.
I needed you in my life 10 years ago to say that. I love that. We don't have to turn off the curiosity, but we also don't have to take action on every little thing that pops into our head about how we can help others make things better, whatever that might be.
Separate the dreaming from the action instead of it collapsing all into one. Even separating the to-do list from the action instead of collapsing it all into one, and allowing all the things to get on the list. Very practical. Let all the things get on the list. Doesn't mean you actually have to do them all. Just see what you're working with.
Right.
Get all the colors on the table before you then choose which ones you want to paint with, color with, play with.
I said when we first got on this podcast, you have some of the deepest listening that I've ever witnessed. And how have you cultivated that level of presence?
Well, thank you for saying that about my listening. I really do love to listen. And maybe this comes from having grown up around a lot of music and playing music. Because when I was in the band, it's funny, I'm recalling this now, but when you're playing in a collective, there are moments where you're making the sound, and then there are moments when you're taking rest and others are making the sound. And to be able to listen for the cue for when it's your turn to come in and knowing when it's your cue to exit and be silent is actually part of what I think I was learning when I was just a kid in band, trying to get out of PE, honestly, listening to people. I am hearing the words that are coming out of their mouth, but I'm also hearing what's not being said, what's not in the conversation. And I'm also listening for what their body is communicating. What is their posture saying? What is their face saying? What can I see in how they are holding the language that they're communicating? And that allows me to listen for almost like the highest good for the person, because I can begin to see there are some things that are getting in the way for this person, as is the case for all of us human beings who are out here humaning. And so how can I hold that with enough compassion so that they can hear themselves unfolding the truth that's there, so they can unfold the wisdom that's already within them? And I find one of the things that I'm often doing as a listener is just saying back to people, here's what I heard. I heard you. You were heard. You were witnessed in that. And that has a very comforting feeling for people to know, okay, wow, yeah, that's my truth that I just spoke, and that truth was received. That truth is now being spoken back to me. So then people hear their own wise words and they're like, wow. Like sometimes people will tell me, oh, wow, you said that so well. And I'll tell them, that's just what you said. But people aren't accustomed to hearing themselves in that way.
Yeah.
They hear the noise. They hear the internal critic within them. They hear the criticism around them. They hear the constraint. Their body is communicating risk to them, whatever is happening. They often are not hearing their own wisdom as loudly as they could. So when I hear them communicate, I'm hearing that and then I'm reflecting that back. And I think that allows me to say, before I ask any kind of question or offer any kind of idea I have, the first order priority is that this person just needs to hear their own wisdom said back to them. And I'm acting a bit as a mirror. And then after I've been able to serve as a mirror, when there is readiness from them, I know we're now going to start building the bridge to what they really, really want. And so then I consider myself to serve people through being a supportive bridge.
Beautiful. That basic humanness of everyone wants to be seen, heard, and loved. And there's so much power in having someone listen to you that deeply, and also not judge, and also not fix, and also not jump into immediate action, but just really, really listening.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think over time, it's right back to where we started. The more I ground myself and am present with my own experience, the more I can show up as a grounded and clear and supportive listener to others. Because if I'm in the act of clearing my own mental clutter, then I have enough space to be able to hold a safe and supportive container for someone else. And I do find this, how can I tell when I am out of alignment? It's when I am impatient with my kids, when I'm impatient with my husband. That is a clear signal to me. Wow, it's not a problem with them. It's a problem with how am I holding the situation right now, and what do I need to do to restore and reground? Is it always immediately available in that moment? No. But even just the act of noticing, okay, I'm in need of regrounding. maybe I need to go to bed early tonight. Maybe tomorrow I need to ask for some help on something. It allows me to, again, get out of that default. There's a need, I take action. There's a need, I take action. There's a need, I take action pattern that I think so many of us leaders find our way into, and pause long enough to say, okay, I have an unmet need, or I have a need to reground, or something feels off. Sometimes it's just as simple as that something feels off before I take that out on everyone else in my household, in my organization, on my team. Let me just come back into, who am I? What's the truth of what's happening within me right now? What's the truth of what's happening around me right now? What do I really want? What do I need to prioritize to get there? And then what are the small actions I need to take that line back up to make it real?
Such a beautiful summary of everything we've spoken about. You are working with executives across the world. And what are you seeing in the leaders that are the most successful or feel the most successful in navigating the world that it is today, which has a lot of uncertainty, which looks very different than years ago? What are things that those leaders are doing, or what are traits that they have in common that are helping them navigate through uncertainty?
I would say what I notice in leaders that are leading through these difficult times with lots of success, a few things. Number one, they have a sense of community. So whether they have trusted advisors, trusted colleagues, a leadership team, they count on a board, they work with their own family, whatever is their support network, they have community that keeps them going. And that sense of community helps to alleviate, I think, one of the biggest problems leaders face, especially leaders at the top, which is a sense of loneliness.
Yes.
And so a leader that can combat loneliness through community is a leader that is setting themselves up to sustain success over time.
Yes.
That's number one. I think the second thing I see in leaders who are able to successfully navigate difficult times is they have a set of power practices that keep them grounded, steady, resilient, so that whatever comes their way, they can navigate through it. Oftentimes leaders feel they must navigate through those things because they're the leader at the top and everyone's looking to them for direction, and that comes with a ton of pressure. Oftentimes I'm working with leaders who are feeling the pressure of needing to support the organization's financial sustainability while at the same time ensuring that culture is thriving, while at the same time ensuring impact is being delivered. It's a lot for them to hold. So when they have a set of power practices that allow them to restore their power, their choice, and their agency in the midst of challenge. And that can include things like recentering and regrounding, like we've talked about. It can include things like getting clear on priorities and goals. It can include things like aligning your calendar to your priority. All those things are power practices that allows the leader to, whatever is aligned with their strengths, lead in their own way, in a very sustainable way, to sustain challenge, because they're in an ongoing practice of restoring themselves repeatedly again and again and again. And then the third thing that I'm noticing in leaders is, and this is a little bit radical, is there's a new paradigm coming forward where leaders who are taking rest, leaders who can take a pause, leaders who can embrace stillness and slowness, I believe they're going to usher in the next paradigm of healthy organizations.
Yes.
Organizations that can step out of the traditional mold of command and control and top-down authority, and we're going to force our way to outcomes. Those paradigms are crumbling, in my humble opinion. And new paradigms are getting built up that are very human-centered, that are very integrated, that can support collectives in thriving, that embrace a spirit of liberation and possibility. Those paradigms are getting built. And I think leaders who allow space for space and space for rest and slowness and stillness can see, okay, I can build something else. Even if there aren't the same kind of models that I can replicate, even if it feels a little bit risky, they are regulating themselves enough to be able to build into the unknown and into the new in a way that doesn't feel scary. It feels supportive of those that they lead. And I think that is the new leadership that's coming, that we all get to look forward to, that we'll all benefit from. And it's going to come from leaders who are grounded and rested and giving themselves space to hear the wisdom within them, but also the wisdom within the people that they're leading.
Yes.
That changes the game when you are in that deep listening to the people that you're caretaking, the people that you're privileged enough to get to lead.
Yes. Well, and the idea around rising tide lifts all ships. When this leader is rest and they're in stillness, and then they gain that clarity, and then they can come in and they're more restored, and then they can listen better. And then their leadership team feels more supportive and listened to, and then they can generate better ideas, more innovation, which then better supports the rest of the employees, which then goes back to what you said of actually achieves the outcomes that everyone wants, but it does it from a different place. That's more sustainable and more supportive.
More sustainable, more supportive, more impactful, more fun,
Yes.
more joyful.
More fun.
I just see this
Yes.
time and time again. Like, leaders can really get back to the joy of leadership when
Yes.
they embrace this new paradigm. And I think oftentimes people are just scared because they don't know how. They've seen success through those old traditional models. They see those models lifted up as the only way things can be achieved. And so to be able to hold enough space for them to feel safe stepping into something different and the unknown, it's okay to not know. I think oftentimes not knowing has felt unsafe for leaders, but again, we can hold the not knowing as an opportunity to discover and to build something that's even better than anything we've ever had before. And this is where I think coaching can be a game changer, is holding enough space for people to know, okay, yeah, there's a new thing I want to go to. The landing spot is not quite clear, but I know it's there.
Yes.
Help me take the next emergent step
Right.
to get
Right.
closer.
And like you said, something that we can all look forward to. I get so excited about stuff like that.
Me too. The last thing I would like to share is, if the world has told you no, what you want is impossible, what you want has never been done before, what you want is not worth the time or the energy, I would invite you to consider that you can still say yes to yourself. You can still say yes to yourself. You can still say no to those stories that are outside that are creating the doubt. You could say no to the stories that are inside creating the doubt. And it's oftentimes part of our ability to say yes, and knowing what we're saying yes to allows us to say the other no's we need to say in order to pursue our yes. And so if the world is handing you a bunch of no's, it doesn't mean you have to take them. It could still be a choice. And I find, as I help many leaders dwell in the realm of possibility as they are stepping out of the depths of impossibility, this is often the first little crack in the piñata where we're getting, is like, it can be another way. And there can be a yes. And that yes is there quietly whispering within. It's often what leads people to coaching. It's often what leads people to curiosity. It's often what leads people probably to this podcast of saying, I think there's something else in there. What is it? And then we learn how to listen in. So I would invite you to say yes to what's whispering within you.
And also a perfect way to summarize what you do within Piñata Possible. Are you ready for a few quick fire questions?
I'm ready.
All right. What does feminine leadership mean to you?
Feminine leadership to me is embracing the flow, embracing the ability to receive and allow things to channel forward, and endless creativity.
So fun. What is the Laura secret sauce?
Laura's secret sauce is typically tea-based because I drink tea every single day. But what that allows me to do is, because tea is the type of drink that you need to boil the water and steep the leaf, it's slow, it's a ritual, and yet it packs a punch. And so tea gets real fun when you start adding all the honey and the milk and you swirl it around, and then you realize, like, oh, there's this new burst of energy I have after having this tea, and I feel ready to connect with other people, and what do I want to build today? You know, tea, there's a reason people take the afternoon tea breaks. It's like, wow, what now? What next for the next chapter? And so I think that's a bit of my secret sauce, special sauce, is how can we slow down enough so that we can create enough energy and momentum that allows us to have the exact kind of day and life and connection with others and impact that we really, really want.
That's you in a nutshell. Let me slow down. Let me have this structure and this ritual, and then I pack a big punch.
That's right.
I love this. Okay. What are you reading or listening to right now?
Oh my gosh. I am reading and listening a lot of things that make me laugh right now. So I really like reading biographies from comedians. And so they bring me so much joy. I'm listening to... So I tend to read a lot of books that are about personal growth and self-development. And one of the things that I'm trying to do this year is to read for pleasure and to read things that make me laugh and smile. And so I'm currently reading Nate Bargatze's book, because I like reading books written by comedians, because I feel like I'm watching a comedy show as I'm listening to them narrate their books.
Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a joy. I so appreciate you, Megan.
Wait. Thank you so much for listening today. I would really, really appreciate it if you left comments and sent in a review. This really helps me understand what resonated with you so I can continue to create more episodes that speak to you. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.